My name is Isabella Brooks, and if you walked into my office right now, you'd probably think I was born into success. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame the Manhattan skyline, sunlight spilling across polished oak floors. A vase of fresh lilies sits on my desk, their fragrance competing with a sharp bite of espresso rising from the cup in my hand. My assistant's heels click faintly down the hall, muted behind glass doors, while the hum of the city pulses below me. From the outside, it looks perfect, but perfection has a way of hiding scars. This morning, as I ran my fingers across the silk of my blouse, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Ethan Carter. My cousin. The cousin who once smiled at me across family dinners, only to later strip me of the land my parents left behind. The land I thought would anchor my future. I should have deleted the message, but I didn't, because the irony was too rich to ignore. He was asking for a meeting here, in this very building. What he doesn't know is that this office, his office, no longer belongs to him. It belongs to me. As I sip my coffee, I can't help the flicker of emotions that ripple through me. Betrayal, yes, but also pride. I survived. I rebuilt. And today, I'm not just facing my past. I'm sitting at the head of it. And soon he'll know exactly what that means. I was 22 when everything unraveled. Fresh out of college, clutching a degree I thought would shield me from the harshness of life. My parents had passed away years earlier, leaving behind a small piece of land in upstate New York. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, or so I believed. Family can surprise you in the cruelest ways. My cousin Ethan was older, charming in the kind of slick, practiced way that fooled most people. He told me he would help manage the property until I got on my feet. I remember the way his hand brushed the papers across the dining room table, the glint in his eye as he assured me it was just temporary paperwork. I signed, trusting him. And just like that, the land that carried my parents' memories, the old oak tree my father planted, the wildflowers my mother loved, slipped from my hands into his. The betrayal burned deeper than I could admit. I still remember the lump in my throat when I confronted him weeks later, the way my voice trembled as I asked, "Why, Ethan? Why would you do this to me?" He just laughed, a short, cold laugh that left me shaking. "You're too young, Isabella. Too naive. You wouldn't know what to do with it anyway." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, fists curled around a silver locket my grandmother had given me before she passed. Inside it was a tiny note she had written, "Never let them decide your worth. Build it for yourself." Tears blurred the words, but the message cut through the fog of betrayal. I realized then that Ethan had stolen my land, but he wasn't going to steal my future. The very next morning, I packed a single suitcase, stuffed my resume into a worn leather folder, and boarded a bus to New York City. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, but for the first time, I felt something more powerful than grief or anger. I felt resolve. That was the day I stopped waiting for people to save me. That was the day I decided to save myself. New York City didn't welcome me with open arms. It swallowed me whole. The first weeks were brutal. A cramped apartment in Queens with peeling wallpaper, the steady drip of a leaky faucet keeping me awake at night. I worked double shifts as a waitress, my feet aching in cheap black flats, all while sending out resumes that never got replies. Some nights, I cried into the steam of instant noodles, wondering if Ethan was right, if I really was too young, too naive, too nothing. But each time doubt crept in, I touched the silver locket at my neck. My grandmother's words steadied me. Build it for yourself. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when I spilled coffee all over the lap of a woman who, by sheer twist of fate, turned out to be Margaret Lane, a sharp, silver-haired real estate broker with a reputation for eating men alive in boardrooms. Instead of yelling, she smiled. "You've got steady hands," she said, eyeing the way I blotted the stain without panicking. "Ever thought about real estate?" It sounded absurd at the time, but Margaret saw something in me I didn't yet see in myself. She offered me a job as her assistant, and I grabbed it like a lifeline. Those first months under her were a baptism by fire. She barked orders, demanded perfection, and threw me into negotiations where men twice my age dismissed me before I even spoke. But I learned. I learned fast. How to read contracts line by line, how to measure the weight of silence in a meeting, how to keep my face calm even when my stomach twisted. My nights stretched into mornings, spreadsheets glowing on my laptop, cheap coffee fueling my drive. I made mistakes, plenty of them, but I refused to quit. Slowly, the wins began to come. The first apartment sale where the commission barely covered rent, but tasted sweeter than champagne. The first client who shook my hand and said, "You fought for me when no one else would." And then the first time my bank account showed more than survival money. Real, undeniable profit. I started small, saving every spare dollar, investing in rundown properties no one else wanted. I painted walls myself, bargained with contractors, and rented units to students and young families. Each deal was a step out of the shadow Ethan had cast over me. Social media made it easy to keep up appearances. I posted photos of lattes, sunsets, books. Nothing flashy, nothing that hinted at the empire I was quietly building. To the outside world, I was just another girl chasing the city's dream. But in reality, my portfolio grew brick by brick, square foot by square foot. By the time I turned 28, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I signed my own deals, hired my own staff, and eventually launched Brooks Realty Group. My name, my own name, etched in gold on glass doors. And the sweetest part? The office I now sat in, the crown jewel of my portfolio, once belonged to Ethan. He had overleveraged, overspent, and eventually sold the building at a loss. And without him ever knowing, I bought it. I didn't plan to reveal that truth. Not then. But fate had a way of circling back. And with his message pinging on my phone now, fate was knocking at my door. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and I heard the echo of footsteps before I saw him. Ethan Carter. My cousin. The man who once took everything from me with a single signature. I stood behind my desk, the skyline glowing behind me like a crown I'd earned. My office was quiet, filled with the faint hum of the city below. On the walls hung modern art, bold strokes of red and black, pieces I had collected over the years because they reminded me of resilience. A shelf near the corner carried framed photographs of my team, my first property purchase, even Margaret Lane smiling with her hand on my shoulder. When Ethan walked in, his eyes darted around the room. He wore a tailored suit, but the smug confidence I remembered was gone. His smile was stretched thin, his jaw tight. "Isabella," he said, voice softer than I expected. "It's been a while." I nodded, letting the silence work against him. Silence was something Margaret had taught me. It always made the guilty squirm. His gaze lingered on the awards lining my bookshelf, the leather chairs, the polished mahogany table. He cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself." I leaned against my desk, crossing my arms. "You could say that." For a moment, the air hung heavy between us. He shifted, finally blurting out, "I'm in a bit of a bind. Some financial trouble. I thought maybe we could work something out." The irony almost made me laugh. Years ago, I had stood before him, begging for an explanation, for decency. And now here he was, asking me for help. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my tone calm, controlled. He hesitated before admitting. "The office building, this building. I lost it. Bad investments. The new owner's been making things difficult." I let his words sink in, savoring the moment. Then, slowly, I pushed off the desk and walked toward the window, my heels clicking against the floor. "That's interesting," I said, my voice steady. "Because as of last year, the new owner of this building is me." The silence that followed was delicious. I turned to face him, and his expression was priceless, disbelief widening his eyes, color draining from his cheeks. "You," he whispered. "Yes, Ethan. Me." I walked closer, lowering my voice. "The cousin you dismissed as naive. The girl you cheated out of her inheritance. The woman you thought would never stand on her own." His lips parted, but no words came out. He looked around the office again, as if hoping to find some proof that I was lying. But the truth surrounded him in every corner. My name on the plaques, my initials engraved on the crystal paperweight, the staff outside addressing me as Miss Brooks. I didn't know, he stammered. Of course you didn't, I said sharply. Because you never thought I mattered enough to keep track of. For a long moment, he just stood there, shoulders slumping, eyes falling to the floor. And for the first time, I saw not the arrogant cousin who had mocked me, but a man undone by his own greed. I should have felt nothing but triumph. Yet, beneath the satisfaction, there was something else, a quiet ache, the ghost of the girl I once was, who had cried over a stolen piece of land. You took my land, Ethan, I said softly. But now I own your office. And that's not luck. That's survival. That's work. That's me. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. What do you want from me? I let the silence stretch once more, feeling the weight of power shift entirely into my hands. What did I want? Revenge? Forgiveness? Or something far more valuable? I circled back to my desk, letting my heels click with purpose against the polished floor. Ethan's eyes followed me, his shoulders sagging lower with every step I took. When I sat, I didn't gesture for him to do the same. He stayed standing, fidgeting with his cufflinks, looking like a man who no longer recognized the world he'd once controlled. What do I want? I repeated his question slowly, tasting the power in the air. I want you to understand that trust is a currency, Ethan. And you bankrupted it a long time ago. He flinched but said nothing. I leaned forward, folding my hands. You're here because you've run out of options. That means the terms are mine. His jaw tightened. And what terms are those? First, I said, you're going to sign over what's left of the properties you still cling to. No loopholes, no hidden clauses. If you want me to consider helping you, honesty starts here. His face twisted with shame, but he nodded. Second, I continued, you will make amends with the family. Not by words, but by actions. You've poisoned relationships for years with arrogance and manipulation. You will show humility, even if it bruises your pride. He shifted uncomfortably. That's easier said than done. I raised a brow. Not my problem. You asked what I want. I'm telling you. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the silence. And third, you will rebuild your life with integrity this time. No shortcuts. No scams. No riding on someone else's back. You'll get a job, earn your living, and stop leeching off other sweat. If I hear otherwise, our agreement ends instantly. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. His pride was fighting, clawing to survive, but the desperation in his eyes betrayed him. You'd really do this? He asked finally. After what I did to you? Yes, I said, my voice steady. Because I refuse to become you. Revenge would be easy, Ethan. But growth for both of us, that's harder. And that's the only thing worth my time. He looked down, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. I could almost see the war inside him, the part of him that wanted to sneer, to push back, and the other part that knew he no longer had the upper hand. You'll set the terms, he muttered. I already have, I replied. Now it's your choice whether you meet them. For the first time since he entered my office, Ethan seemed small. Not the towering figure who had once stolen my inheritance, not the smug cousin who laughed in my face, but a man stripped bare of power. I let out a slow breath, softening my tone. Ethan, I don't hate you, but I don't trust you. If you want a second chance, earn it. Not with excuses. With action. He nodded faintly, his eyes glistening with something I hadn't expected to see. Not anger, not arrogance, but shame. Real shame. And in that moment, I realized I had done more than win back what was mine. I had redefined what it meant to win. In the weeks that followed, I watched Ethan stumble through the terms I'd laid out. At first, he resisted. Pride is a stubborn thing. But desperation has a way of forcing change. He sold off his last remaining assets, this time without trickery. I heard whispers from relatives that he'd shown up at family gatherings, quieter than before, offering help instead of boasting. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a start. As for me, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. Not because I'd humiliated him, but because I had faced him without crumbling. The girl who once cried over stolen land was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built a kingdom from the rubble. One evening, after everyone had left the office, I sat alone with the city lights flickering below. I reached into my drawer and pulled out my grandmother's silver locket. The metal was cool in my palm, the tiny note inside still folded neatly. Never let them decide your worth. Build it for yourself. I smiled through a sting of tears. She had been right all along. Ethan hadn't decided my worth. Neither had betrayal, or loneliness, or sleepless nights in a leaky apartment. I had built it, brick by brick, deal by deal, with grit pressed into every corner of my soul. The land he stole from me had once felt like the end of my story. Now I realized it had only been the beginning, because losing it pushed me to find something greater, something no one could ever take away again. My power, my voice, my independence. I rose, crossing the office to the tall glass window. Below, the city pulsed with 1,000 tiny stories, some beginning, some ending, some caught in the painful middle. My reflection stared back at me, steady and unshaken. Ethan's downfall wasn't my triumph. My triumph was standing here at all. I pressed the locket to my chest, whispering softly into the quiet room. He once took my land, but today, I hold the keys to his office. And with that truth, I finally felt free.